And this week we're in chapter 13. It's called The Guiltless World. And just before we start that, I want to just point out here that salvation is talked about in A Course in Miracles. And one of the things that people may get just a little bit sort of backward in their mind is that salvation is necessary because of the separation. Salvation isn't really necessary otherwise, because there would be nothing for us to save us from if in fact we weren't caught up in the idea of a dream of the separation. So salvation, prayer, forgiveness, and so on and so forth are all different in a sense from what really they represent. Because of the separation of cause and effect, then there's some processing that has to be done for us to understand the true use of salvation and the true use of forgiveness, or the true use of accepting the atonement for ourselves. So it says here, salvation and forgiveness are the same. They both imply that something has gone wrong. And there's the rub right there. Because since they imply that something has gone wrong, then in fact you see that, in a sense, thinking about salvation and forgiveness also seems to make the world outside ourselves real. So there's a rub there. In other words, there's something to allow ourselves to be trained to look beyond it, to look through it, to look beyond or past the fact that the world outside ourselves seems to appear to us, so that therefore we need salvation and forgiveness. So I just want to point that out before we go on. And also, lesson 169 is talked about in this lesson, or in this chapter also, and it's important to see that by grace I'm released. In other words, I'm going to eventually receive grace, but it's not something of time and space. It's something that my mind ascends to. So in the ascension process, then, I live in a state of grace and watch the dream then from a different state above the battleground, is what the Course refers to it as. So grace occurs above the battleground, in other words, above all thought that supports anything other than peace and unity and holiness. Everything else that thought might be used for, which would be below that, would be where the battleground is at. So the Course refers to above the battleground. And it's ascension, a pre-ascension of the mind to the state of grace. So the Course doesn't talk about that in a great deal, and that's why I just wanted to point it out. You might want to read through lessons 99 and 169. And I think there's a couple other lessons that are mentioned in here also. They're semi-important for understanding a deeper look at chapter 13. So Irene recorded most of this for me, and I'm going to play this part now from her.
Chapter 13, The Guiltless World. By grace I live, by grace I am released, by grace I give, by grace I will release. Atonement has nothing to do with improving. Atonement has to do only with one whole truth. The simple fact is that separating self-beliefs originate in condemning minds. Separateness is an effect of condemnation. The illusory thought of separation is a conflict that arises because there seems to be an actual separated self. Truth and illusion both are equal now, for both have happened in the mind. Yet we cannot ever actually value perceiving separateness. This sense of separation would never have arisen if you had not distorted your perception of truth, and had thus perceived yourself as lacking. One part of the mind perceives another as wrongful, while expressing or repressing strong emotional reactions, while another aspect is telling us we can't or ought not to act or think in that way.
So there's where the rub is, like I mentioned earlier. So we sort of have our mind is sort of against our own mind. In other words, it's opposed to the truth or the wholeness of reality. It's opposed to grace, God's grace. It doesn't recognize itself, so therefore it cannot recognize God's grace. because it does not actually recognize what it actually is. The mind, in reality, is the extension of God's into His creating. And we are His creating, and we are one with Him, and not at all separate from Him. So we are like the same as Him in that sense. He's the Father, and we are the extension of His great love. Another add-on here, the illusory thought of separation. I'll just open that here in a different tab for a moment, and we'll take a look here at what that
If you're a
brings
Delaware homeowner and you haven't made the switch to solar,
we don't really need that commercial. But this is the attainment of the real world, and this is from 8 CIM Inspiration. It actually comes from this chapter, and it's playing this chapter, section 7, the entire section. I think it's one of the most important sections in the Course in Miracles to listen to or to learn from multiple times. So since I always just summarize or take an extract from each section, I thought I'd add that in there also, so you can play that and listen to the whole section if you're interested in doing that.
We must recognize forgiveness, not merely for resentments. Forgiveness must eliminate condemnation. Recall, forgiveness is rooted in guiltlessness. As you look upon yourself and judge what you do honestly, you may be tempted to wonder how you can be guiltless. Yet consider this: you're not only guiltless in time, but in eternity. You have sinned in the past, but there is no past. Always has no direction. Time seems to go in one direction, but when you reach its end, it will roll up like a long carpet, spread along the paths behind you, and will disappear. As long as you believe the Son of God is guilty, you will walk along this carpet, believing that it leads to death, and the journey will seem long and cruel and senseless, for so it is.
So he refers to here something that's sort of fascinating if you're into science-based material. Reality actually occurs in such a way as that it builds from a two-dimensional space. So our reality, we see everything as in 3 dimensions. In other words, it has height, width, and length also in 3 dimensions. But in fact, in reality, it's projected more like a hologram onto a flat surface and then animated on the flat surface in 3 dimensions. So that's the way reality actually occurs in a scientific look at it. And there's not too much controversy now about that fact. However, of course, it does tend to bring up objections and different ideas and so on and so forth. But there's not really too strong objection to the fact of that this universe itself is a hollow fractal sort of occurrence that begins on a 2-dimensional space with 1 point and then expands on the 2-dimensional space to become 3-dimensional, and therefore to support a life outside of our mind in which we can have a universe of an environment to live in and so on and so forth. And I include that today just as a note for later on, because there's a couple of videos that I included here that talk about consciousness mechanics, and it's kind of a good idea if you're interested in looking into that, because in fact it explains a little bit more really about how time works and how consciousness works with time to make a reality seem to appear outside of ourselves, outside of our bodies even, but our bodies are the outside part of it also. So it's just an interesting sideline if you're interested in it. I enjoy science myself, and I enjoy scientific explanations about how consciousness works and about how the universe works also, and trying then to see it actually correlates quite well with what the Course teaches.
Introduction.
I'm sorry, we'll go back to that. So we must recognize forgiveness not merely for resentments, but we must therefore make progress from that. As we progress, we'll see, even in time, Grace is not the goal this course aspires to attain, yet we prepare for grace in that an open mind can hear the call to awakening. And this refers to lesson 169, which I had mentioned. An end time is set. This refers to this carpet of time. An end time is set, and in reality there is no future. So in reality we stand, in a sense we stand at the end of time, looking back on the end of time and imagining that we make it once again to review mentally what has gone by. And you notice, perhaps by now, that oftentimes your mind does seem to get caught up with the past, to reevaluate it, to analyze it, to look at it, and to perhaps learn from it, hopefully, but certainly to look into what seems to have happened in your past so that you can reconcile it with what you choose to do now, to live in a more kind and gentle sort of way, leading with your heart into the realization that you need guidance, spiritual guidance, so that your mind can be aligned with what truly you believe that you love. Our prayer today: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And we'll pick up with Irene again with this in a moment. She's going to read through much of the material here. This week we're looking at guilt, guiltlessness, how that we perceive guiltlessness. Also, importantly, the function of time, and the only two emotions fit into this chapter to help us see how we can choose guiltlessness. It talks a little bit about the present, finding the present or presence, the attainment of the real world, which is only in presence, only in the eternal presence. However, the infinite presence is the pathway to find it. To find myself in my infinite mind is to align myself with my heart. And in the finding of myself in my infinite mind, then I can actually see the correction of my past and the introduction now of a sense about myself of living wholly in peace. And so we see also the perception then that leads to knowledge, the cloud of guilt, a little bit of review about why we still get stuck, the release from guilt, and the peace of heaven within. And so I'll turn on Irene here with the reading of the introduction and the next section.
Introduction. If you did not feel guilty, you could not attack, for condemnation is the root of attack. It is the judgment of one mind by another, as unworthy of love and deserving of punishment. But herein lies the split, for the mind that judges perceives itself as separate from the mind being judged, believing that by punishing another, it will escape punishment. The acceptance of guilt into the mind of God's Son is the beginning of the separation, as the acceptance of the atonement is its end. The world you see is a delusional system of those made mad by guilt. Look carefully at this world, and you will realize that this is so. For this world is a symbol of punishment, and all the laws that seem to govern it are laws of death. Separateness is made of the insane judgments of a confused mind. It maintains that we are unworthy of love, and that we deserve punishment. The confused mind judges wrongly. It maliciously condemns. It maintains disassociated delusions. By fear and condemnation, it is projecting guilt and judging unworthiness outwardly.
So as cause and effect might become a matter of joining again, as we join our mind again with our heart, or with our awareness of true love, of what we really want, of who we really are, as this begins to join, then so do cause and effect begin to join again. And there's the glimpse of heaven in that. There's a glimpse of guiltlessness. There's a living of the innocence in our mind then, in that union of our mind with our hearts in the awareness of spirit. So spirit guides us from there. And this is why lesson 155 was so important, because whenever we're upset or worried, frustrated, whenever we find ourselves to be in some sort of difficulty in our mind, we should withdraw then from that mindlessness, from that chaos. We should withdraw then from that and allow ourselves to be guided again by the peace of the awareness of the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit can then keep our mind unified with our heart, in a sense, because guiding us through whatever seems to be difficult or different or frustrating or whatever, we need to allow ourselves to see the end or the undoing of that in our mind, to rest in peace. There's where the strengthening of our ability to choose rightly comes from, is in these experiences of allowing ourselves to withdraw from the upsets, the difficulties, the confusion, withdraw from it, and in withdrawing from it, to reflect upon peace and to reflect upon letting go of suffering, and to allow the Holy Spirit then to become real again in our mind, to unify our mind and our heart with our awareness now that's growing towards who really we are, the Spirit of God, the extension of God's love.
Confused, separated minds judge wrongly. Separateness is victim mentality, comprised of guilty, victimizing judgments, insane judgments, conflict, and confused wrong-mindedness. Separateness maintains all are unworthy of love, and all must condemn all. With the Course, we're learning about innocence, and thus, in peace, we will not value separateness. Attack is conflict, a choice often made unconsciously. Conflict blocks innocence out. Attack is an affect of separation, not its cause. Choosing separation from others is obsessive. Confused minds compel us to maliciously castigate and condemn, supposing that upset and blame is right. A confused mind is malicious, grandiose, suffering, delusional, self-doubting, conflict-ridden, and loathing.
Okay, so here's where we see, why does it seem that I keep getting lost in my mind into the attraction of difficulties? Why do I seem to sometimes just seem to walk right into them with a bad attitude? There I am in the midst of bad behavior again, or confusion again, or chaos in my mind again. It seems like I just walk into it sometime. So the reason we walk into it sometime is because, in fact, our mind is being conditioned by the affect of the separation, not by the cause of ourselves, who really we are, but by the affect of the separation of cause and effect. So the separation of cause and effect brings with it a conditioning which makes use of our mind separate from our true reality, separate from our spirit. And this is why the Course refers to it as the dream of separation, because it can't actually happen in reality. There's no separation of God from his idea of himself and God from this idea of his creation. They are the cause and the effect together, and there's no separation of that. But in our mind, which has been confused by trying to evaluate and analyze how that all can work, in our mind then we became fascinated with that in such a sense as that we became, in our mind, separated from our truth. In our mind, therefore, we must live towards thine own self be true, something that's a concept in the Alcoholics Anonymous, and many other people teach also that we must be true to our own selves. So there's an effort that's involved in that. The mind is always integrating anyway. If we give it help to integrate what we really need, which is to be joined again with our cause, which is God, if we give it a little help to do that, it will actually start the process of integration. If we don't get into doubt again, if we don't get conditioned by fear again, if we don't get conditioned by chaos and confusion again, then we begin to straighten right out again. So there's a little effort involved in it, a little willingness, as the Course teaches, and as the 12 Steps teaches, and as others teach. There needs to be a little willingness and a little open-mindedness to realize that my faith obviously must be strengthened when I'm confused. obviously I'm faithless when I'm confused. If obviously I can't live in the peacefulness and the awareness of spirit, then obviously I must be confused and therefore must have lost my faith to some degree. So we have to give a little help to our mind to help it be undone from its confusion.
Guiltlessness and invulnerability. The Holy Spirit wants only this, for sharing the Father's love for his Son. He seeks to remove all guilt from his mind, that he may remember his Father in peace. Peace and guilt are antithetical, and the Father can be remembered only in peace. Love and guilt cannot coexist, and to accept one is to deny the other. Guilt hides Christ from your sight, for it is a denial of blamelessness of God's Son. Accepting the atonement teaches you that what immortality is. For by accepting your guiltlessness, you learn that the past has never been, and so the future is needless and will not be. The guiltless Son of God. The ultimate purpose of projection is always to get rid of guilt. Yet characteristically, the ego attempts to get rid of guilt from its viewpoint only. For much as the ego wants to retain guilt, you find it intolerable, since guilt stands in the way of your remembering God. This pull is so strong, you cannot resist it. On this issue, then, the deepest split of all occurs. For if you are to retain guilt, as the ego insists, you cannot be you. Only by persuading you that it is you could the ego possibly induce you to project guilt and thereby keep it in your mind.
So a lot happens because of that affect. So the affect is this influence on our mind that has to do with separation of cause and effect. And the affect of this is, in fact, very uncomfortable. So it's extraordinarily uncomfortable. Most of the reason why it's uncomfortable is because there's a fear of this return to absolute peace, absolute stillness, absolute calm. Since absolute peace, stillness, and calm are like a gap as it occurs, it seems frightening. Also, as far as the sensation of it goes, it gets more intense and more intense and more intense, and it actually expands as if it's outside of your body. So that also seems to be somewhat scary because the effect of it, of joining cause back with effect, is that the expansion of, it seems like the expansion of your body. And then it seems like your expansion includes yourself outside of your body. And it seems to get even more intense and even greater. And so therefore, this tends to be a frightening experience. It shouldn't be a frightening experience, however. If you learn to breathe calmly and to smile and to relax as the gap begins to expand, then you begin to have a better sense about yourself, is that there's nothing to fear there. Don't fear the expansion of yourself. When you feel the expansion of yourself, remember to smile and to calmly breathe deeply and to go with it. Because as you do go with it, there will be a sense of ecstasy, a sense of calm will come after that. The sense of ecstasy perhaps will come first. I think it will. That's how it generally works. And then a sense of deep calm comes after that. And a awareness now that is almost without objects, almost without personality, and almost without any outside interference whatsoever at all. So this is what people describe as the awakening of the kundalini, and then the final stage of that is this enlightenment that we're saying this is what we're seeking, this enlightenment. So don't be upset or worried or frustrated or feeling like you're doing something wrong if you feel this expansion begin to occur. A warmth perhaps in the center of your body, and it seems to expand from there and it seems to grow from there. Let it grow, breathe deeply into it, and expel your breath with a second or two longer than what you took in, and allow yourself to just go with it. And you'll see an expansion of yourself will be very calming.
Yet consider how strange a solution the ego's arrangement is. You project guilt to get rid of it, but you're actually merely concealing it. You do experience the guilt, but you have no idea why. This course has explicitly stated that its goal is for you. Its goal for you is happiness and peace. The atonement has always been interpreted as the release from guilt, and this it is correct if it is understood. Yet even when I interpret it for you, you may reject it and do not accept it for yourself. You have perhaps recognized the futility of the ego and its offerings, but though you do not want them, you may not yet look upon the alternative with gladness. In the extreme, you are afraid of redemption, and you believe it will kill you. Make no mistake about the depth of this fear, for you believe it. In the presence of truth, you might turn on yourself and destroy yourself. Your guilty secret is nothing, and if you would but bring it to the light will dispel it.
So what is describing? That's the experience of coming to the light, the experience of enlightenment or coming into the light.
Guilt is always in your mind, which has condemned itself. Reject it not, for while you do, it cannot be undone. Believing attack as though there is anything of truth to it, then there is guilt in condemning judgment. This is how attack makes guilt, shame and blame, seemingly so real. And while attack is believable to you, there is no way to overcome the victimization cycles of suffering. The Holy Spirit dispels guilt, so simply accept the calming recognition that guilt is never real, and it is never necessary. Separation thinking relies on and fuels guilt by attacks. The Holy Spirit stands at the end of time, where you must be because He is with you. He has already undone everything unworthy of the Son of God, for such was His mission, given Him by God. Grace is the natural state of every Son of God. When he is not in a state of grace, he is out of his natural environment and does not function well.
So the separation thought system then is what makes us seem to need to defend ourselves, and in fact also seems to be the reason why we must attack someone, anyone for that matter, or correct them, or disagree with them, or even to agree with them if it involves some sort of commiserating or some sort of idea about making things seem to be real, that they're difficult or confusing. To agree with any of these areas then of separation is to make attack. So attack seems to be only about enemies, but in fact, when we begin to explore what really it is, it's the separation in any form. So to look upon the separation in any form as though it is real, then is an attack. It's an attack in terms of interpretations and beliefs, and in fact needs to be undone by the Holy Spirit, can't be just undone by you as an individual. And so you see that even when that seemed to have been true, that you did undo it yourself, that actually you were helped by Spirit, by calm, by peace, by joy and happiness. These are spiritual. They are without opposition. And that is the Spirit helping you in those situations and circumstances, even though you might not have recognized perhaps that it was Spirit that was helping you. So separation thinking is just a very complex network of projections and judgments. Contradictory, confusing information that's being miscreated or misused, such that it's projected outside of ourselves, so that it needs to be judged over and over and over again. And this is why I try to make a point: is try not to analyze and evaluate everything very much, because you really just need to withdraw from it. Yes, you can look at it in terms of, was there anything that I could have done differently? That's perfectly fine. But wait until you get to a peaceful place first to see that in fact you're safe, to see that in fact you can return to being calm, and then spirit can help you see it in a different way. And that's what you really, when you pray and when you ask yourself for forgiveness of your suffering, that's what you're really doing, is you're asking to see things in a different way, in a peaceful, calming way. And so that's what we do after we connect again in spirit with our realization that that's the healing process. And in the healing process, then, this leads to miracle mindedness and therefore to that lightness of being where in fact nothing can seem to be wrong.
The fear of redemption. Under the ego's dark foundation is the memory of God. And it is of this that you are really afraid, for this memory would instantly restore you to your proper place, and it is this place you've sought to leave. You must look upon your illusions and not keep them hidden, because they do not rest on their own foundation. In concealment, they appear to do so, and thus they seem to be self-sustained. This is the fundamental illusion on which the others rest. For beneath them and concealed, as long as they are hidden, is a loving mind that thought it made them in anger. And the pain in the mind is so apparent when it's uncovered that its need of healing cannot be denied.
So we see here why the mind must be connected with the heart, but also joining in spirit, because otherwise the mind is misinterpreting, because it's looking at the reality outside of itself as though that's the reality, as though that's where the cause is at in the world outside ourselves. Remember, that's all effect. And it's the affect of that is the conditioning of the mind to look upon it perhaps lovingly, but to still see a need for evaluation and analysis and contradictions and confusion to be resolved, when in fact it really just needs to withdraw from that. The loving mind needs to unify with the atonement process so it can find the truth about peace, that there is no such thing as conflict and confusion and difficulties and constant change that seems to occur in the world outside ourselves. It must withdraw from that entirely to be united in spirit for this awakening to occur into the enlightenment, into the light that brings all the end of all frustration and confusion, at least for the momentary experience of it, until we become strengthened that the momentary experiences of it begin to grow into many, 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 many moments of the same experience without any interruption from the outside. So this is where practice of a daily basis, practice of mindfulness or of meditation, which allows us to seek or to remember this sense of peace about ourselves, this sense of lightness about ourselves. We probably all have had enough experience where there's a sense of lightness and a sense of peace that just recalling it can be quite helpful to, again, remember that I want to return to peace, and I want to let go of all suffering or worrying, all regretting, all festering and ruminating. I want to let go all of what seems to be a problem for this time to rest in the peace of knowing Spirit is here to bring me to safety, to heal my mind, to join my mind again with who I really am in Spirit as the extension of God's love. And then, in fact, it makes it a little easier and a little easier to fathom how am I going to get through this difficulty, and how am I going to deal with that person, and how am I going to deal with this new situation, this new challenge. They will continue to come up in the physical world. Protect yourself from the physical upsets, the physical harm, but don't try to protect yourself from the psychological harm. Just withdraw from it. Just withdraw from the psychological harm. Just withdraw from the nasty words, from the frustrations of seeing something that isn't acceptable isn't kind, isn't nice. Just withdraw from that. We don't make psychological time. Withdraw from the psychological burdens. Withdraw from them as soon as possible. So only the physical challenges will remain, hopefully, because once it's just the physical challenges that remain, then our mind can stay with the enlightenment. And this is where our minds are certainly best off to be staying with the enlightenment. The dissolving of the ego, we could say that would be also.
Beneath all the grandiosity you hold so dear is your real call for help. You who prefer separation to sanity could not obtain it in your right mind. You were at peace until you asked for special favor, and God did not give it, for the request was alien to him, and you could not ask this of a father who truly loved his son. Therefore you made of him an unloving father, demanding of him what only such a father could give. And the peace of God's son was shattered, for he no longer understood his father. He feared what he had made, but still more did he fear his real father, having attacked his own glorious equality with him. In peace he needed nothing and asked for nothing. In war he demanded everything and found nothing. For how could the gentleness of love respond to his demands, except by departing in peace and returning to the Father? If a son did not wish to remain in peace, he could not remain at all, for a darkened mind cannot live in the light, and it must seek a place of darkness where it can believe it is where it is not. God did not allow this to happen.
So, and he asked and asked for nothing. In other words, there was nothing needed, so there were no questions to ask. There was a choiceless awareness, is what we found ourselves in enlightenment. There's nothing to ask for. There's nothing outside of ourselves that we think we need. We rest in that enlightenment from there on. There's nothing to ask for in terms of change, in terms of anything that has to do with reality. All reality is supplied for us in that peacefulness of the realization of that enlightening state, egoless, peaceful, perfectly calm.
Yet you demanded that it happen, and therefore believed that it was so. To single out is to make alone, and thus make lonely. God did not do this to you. Could he set you apart, knowing that your peace lies in his oneness? He denied you only your request for pain, for suffering is not of his creation. Having given you creation, he could not take it from you. He could but answer your insane request with the same answer that would abide with you in your insanity. And this he did. No one who hears his answer but will give up insanity, for his answer is a reference point beyond illusion, from which you can look back on them and see them as insane. But seek this place, and you will find it, for love is in you, and will lead you there. You can hold on to the past only through guilt, for guilt establishes that you will be punished for what you have done, and thus depends on one-dimensional time, proceeding from past to future. No one who believes this can understand what always means, and therefore guilt must deprive you of the appreciation of eternity.
So when we find situations maybe upsetting, then we find that we have a tendency to deny the reality. It's denied by a projection, in other words, by a thought or belief, an interpretation of some sort that seems to make the outside world real, so that we can judge it to be the cause of our problem. Whatever the problem seems to be, it seems to also set off this difficulty of seeing the world without the need to see it as an illusion, and the illusion instead is the reversal of this process. So when I begin to recognize that everything that appears outside of myself is the illusion, then I begin to actually be able to see through it, to see beyond its beyond its effect, beyond its affect, into the cause of the truth, to replace this now with the truth. This is where it's an infinitely peaceful moment. An infinitely peaceful moment. It's not quite eternity because I'm still perceiving, but this is where I find myself above the battleground that I was speaking about a little while ago. I find myself in a peaceful perception about the world outside myself, so it has no harm seemingly occurring, such that my mind needn't seem to protect me from whatever seems to be happening. That's the protection of the ego, actually, is what that is. And this is where, in fact, it becomes difficult to tell, am I free of the ego or not? Any thoughts of difficulty are of the ego. Any thoughtlessness or any peacefulness without any thought, or in other words, above thought, above the battleground, where it's only peaceful, then in fact is the beginning of enlightenment. There's a gap there that occurs such that we, in a sense, sort of leave the universe behind. So all perception then becomes one perception of the truth, of the awareness of infinite patience. Infinite patience is the way the Course describes what happens above the battleground. So it's an infinite patience that, in fact, is looking for the reconnecting of all that's real, which is in our heart, with all that is spirit, which is who we really are. So there's a short period of time there. The Course refers to it as the appearance of the Holy Spirit. In the appearance of the Holy Spirit, then, and in the miracle-mindedness, and remaining within miracle-mindedness, then, with infinite patience, also this brings about the carpet becoming rolled up again, and seeing the end of time now in a holy instant, and then the end of the conditioning of the affect of separation of cause and effect. So it's a process, the way we see it, it's actually an unreality turning into the awareness of the reality. So the enlightenment experience is the beginning of that. Now, I played something a little too far here, so hopefully I got this right. I rolled it back just a second, I think.
And what always means, and therefore guilt must deprive you of the appreciation of eternity. You are immortal because you are eternal, and always must be now. Guilt, then, is a way of holding past and future in your mind to ensure the ego's continuity. For if what has been will be punished, the ego's continuity is guaranteed. Yet the guarantee of your continuity is God's, not the ego's, and immortality is the opposite of time, for time passes away, while immortality is constant. You would and could not attack anyone if you will fully realize that they are really you. Then with this complete recognition, you would not judge yourself nor condemn anyone.
So there's two things actually being undone here. Remember, duality always has another layer to it. So there's guilt, that's one layer of it. Guilt goes along with shame and blame, and also goes along with the other side of it, which is what blame connects it to, which is prideful self-will. In other words, my own will opposed to God's will, not knowing it's opposed to God's will, believing in fact that it is right. Right-mindedness now is my own creation, or my own miscreation, really is a better word to say, and it's opposed to God's will, but not necessarily knowing that it's opposed to God's will. It gets me stuck now in this projection and judgment. Thought loops is the way that it's referred to oftentimes by people. I seem to be stuck in a thought loop. I just can't escape from this argument in my head. This is a thought loop, or sometimes people refer to it as a committee meeting. In other words, everybody seems to have a different voice within me. There's nobody real in there, of course, but there's an argument that's going on, and there's many aspects to it, so I call it a committee meeting, as if there are many voices within it. They're all my voice. They're all my problem. And I'm working so hard on my problem that I can't see that I've got myself stuck in a thought loop between guilt and willful self-pride, not able to escape from it because I'm using one, in a sense, to feed the other. I'm using one to project the other, and then one to judge the other. That mind that we talked about at the beginning, that's against itself.
The function of time. And now the reason why you're afraid of this course should be apparent, for this is a course on love, because it is about you. You have been told that your function in this world is healing, and your function in heaven is creating. The ego teaches that your function on earth is destruction, and you have no function at all in heaven. It would thus destroy you here and bury you here, leaving you no inheritance except the dust out of which it thinks you were made. As long as it's reasonably satisfied with you, as its reasoning goes, it offers you oblivion. When it becomes overtly savage, it offers you hell. The ego has a strange notion of time, and it is with this notion that your questioning might well begin. The ego invests heavily in the past, and in the end believes that the past is the only aspect of time that is meaningful. Remember that its emphasis on guilt enables it to ensure its continuity by making the future like the past, and thus avoiding the present. By the notion of paying for the past in the future, the past becomes the determiner of the future, making them continuous without an intervening present. For the ego regards the present only as a brief transition to the future, in which it brings the past to the future by interpreting the present in past terms.
So the ego is the representative form of a separated mind within the reality, however, believing itself to be outside of the reality, believing itself to have its own reality, which it creates in its own image. Now remember, the ego doesn't exist. So we're making the world outside of ourselves in an image that does not exist. And so the functions of the use of our mind then also do not exist. Nothing outside of reality, of the oneness of God, of the unifying, peaceful extension of His love, nothing else exists actually. So everything can be safely looked at first to see, is this an illusion? And if I'm not quite sure, then I can probably assume that I'm stuck again in an illusion. Any upset, worry, frustration, difficulty, any difference of it even, is part of the illusion. So get used to looking for this. Is this an illusion first? In other words, can I be rescued from this by the salvation plan of accepting the atonement for myself? Can I just rest in mindful peacefulness to escape from all suffering first before I try to take action, before I try to be myself? Because I'm not myself when I'm identifying with myself as a body, when I'm identifying with myself as though I live in a world that's actually outside of my mind. Then in fact I'm working in the delusion again, and it might seem easy to escape from the illusion, but only if I practice doing so. So I practice doing so, eventually this enlightenment will occur. If I give it practice enough, then eventually it will occur. So one thing that I studied with a few other people was something called the Ho'oponopono idea, which is to say that peace begins with me. And in acceptance of that peace begins with me, then peace without any need for understanding then may continue to grow in my heart, may continue to unify my mind then in that peacefulness. And so, in fact, I have an example for myself as I begin to have that experience. I have an example for myself to remember to again get this started, that peace begins with me. And then to extend all peace this way in a way that isn't even comprehensible, In other words, I don't have to do it. I'm above the battleground. I'm above thought. All thought, therefore, is being used for the unifying of this joyful peacefulness without any effort. That's the wonderful thing about it. There's no effort necessary.
Now has no meaning to the ego. The present merely reminds it of past hurts, and it reacts to the present as if it were the past. The ego cannot tolerate release from the past, and although the past is over, the ego tries to preserve its image by responding as if it were present. It dictates your reaction to those you meet in the present from a past reference point, obscuring their present reality. In effect, if you follow the ego dictates, you will react to your brother as though he were someone else, and this will surely prevent you from recognizing him as he is, and you will receive messages from him out of your own past, because by making it real in the present, you are forbidding yourself to let it go. You thus deny yourself the message of release that every brother offers you now. The shadowy figures from the past are precisely what you must escape. They are not real and have no hold over you unless you bring them with you. They carried the spots of pain in your mind, directing you to attack in the present in retaliation for a past that's no more, and this decision is one of future pain. Unless you learn.
Not again. All right. So I do bring them with me into the acceptance of the atonement. It's at the altar where prayer begins to become forgiveness. It's at that altar where, in fact, it's transmuted. My pain, my suffering, my difficulties, my conflict and confusion, all is given over at the altar of prayer. And then on the altar of prayer, then, in fact, it's the sacrifice. I sacrifice my suffering for the purpose of receiving peace. I bring it to the altar. No, it doesn't need to go any further than that because it's not real. But I bring it to the altar to allow myself to see what isn't real. I give over to you so that you can show me the truth about what it is that I have been misperceiving, that I had believed that was real. I let it go knowing it's not real, and I ask you to show me a different way to perceive, that you being the Holy Spirit, that is. Now, unless you learn that the past is an illusion.
The past pain is an illusion. You're choosing a future of illusions and losing the many opportunities you could find for release in the present. The ego would preserve your nightmares and prevent you from awakening and understanding their past. Would you recognize a holy encounter if you were merely perceiving it as a meeting with your own past? For you would be meeting no one, and the sharing of salvation, which makes the encounter holy, would be excluded from your sight. The Holy Spirit teaches you, you always meet yourself, and the encounter is holy because you are. The ego teaches that you always encounter your past, because your dreams were not holy, the future cannot be, and the present is without meaning.
So I'm looking for this message that I'm meeting myself in absolute peace, where the Spirit joins my mind with who really I am. There is only absolute peace. There is infinitely patient, absolute peace. No objects are necessary. No thought is necessary. No choices are necessary. In fact, I don't even think about them. In fact, I don't even remember them for that moment when I meet myself in reality, in spirit.
It is evident that the Holy Spirit's perception of time is the exact opposite of the ego's. The reason is equally clear, for they perceive the goal of time as diametrically opposed. The Holy Spirit interprets time purpose as rendering the need for time unnecessary. He regards the function of time as temporary, serving only his teaching function, which is temporary by definition. His emphasis is therefore on the only aspect of time that can extend to the infinite, for now is the closest approximation of eternity that this world offers. It is in the reality of now, without past or future, that the beginning of the appreciation of eternity lies, for only now is here, and only now presents the opportunities for the holy encounters in which salvation can be found. The ego, on the other hand, regards the function of time as one of extending itself in place of eternity, for like the Holy Spirit, the ego interprets the goal of time as its own. The continuity of past and future under its direction is the only purpose the ego perceives in time, and it closes over the present so that no gap in its own continuity can occur. Its continuity, then, would keep you in time, while the Holy Spirit would release you from it. It is his interpretation of the means of salvation that you must learn to accept, if you would share his goal of salvation for you.
This is where that gap occurs that I was speaking about earlier. There seems to be a gap between the thoughts. There seems to be a gap. It seems to grow, in a sense. You seem to expand, in a sense, into that gap. And therefore, the reality outside yourself becomes less and less real while you have the experience of this expansion of joy, of this expansion of your peacefulness, of this expansion into infinite patience, where in fact you see the dissolving of the world outside yourself, or really you see through it even if your eyes are open. So you needn't close your eyes, but if you do close your eyes and allow yourself to enjoy that gap so it grows, so you actually experience the expansion of yourself from a warmth to a great expansion of yourself. It will start with a warmth, and it will grow from that warmth into something that is quite exceptional if you allow yourself to experience it. If it frightens you, then that will cause you to withdraw from it or to even forget it, as if it didn't even happen.
You too will interpret the function of time as you interpret yours. If you accept your function in the world of time as one of healing, you will emphasize only the aspects of time in which healing can occur. Healing cannot be accomplished in the past. It must be accomplished in the present to release the future. This interpretation ties the future to the present and extends the present rather than the past. But if you interpret your function as destruction, you will lose sight of the present and hold on to the past to ensure a destructive future, as time will be as you interpret it, for of itself it is nothing.
So, healing cannot be accomplished in the past. Only the now is actually real. It's actually an opening to reality. So the present moment, which is unfortunately infinitely small until you become aware of your presence. So it's infinitely small at first, so you don't have to look for it because you won't find it. But in fact, you have to meditate and pray to let go of the suffering, to let go of the fear of the reality which you will be shown in the light, to open your mind to see the light in your mind, to open your mind to see the extension of God's peace as his love enters your mind, which is his light. So allow yourself to see that, such as that in fact nothing else seems to be real. Allow yourself to see nothing else seems to be real. See through the illusion that way. The illusion that way doesn't really cover the present. There needs to be some little bit of work done first yourself, because you need to allow yourself to integrate this experience. And most people are frightened by it, or don't notice it happening, or have something else that seems to be important on their mind, or they're ruminating over something that doesn't really need to be looked at so individually like that, because it's upsetting. Which needs to be looked at with spirit instead, to bring it to the altar, to let it be released from suffering into an awareness of peace. So these are ways that we continue to miss the opportunity to see what Spirit is showing us. And so we want to grow into the preparedness for accepting God's grace. And as we do so, then we will get a little better at it and a little better at it. So don't condemn yourself for the fact of that you make mistakes or for the fact of that you ruminate once in a while. Catch yourself doing it and try to return again to peace. Remember something that's peaceful, something that's calming, and then continue in that, praying for the release from fear, praying for the release from the burden of yourself, and allowing yourself to see that when you're given peace and you're given the calm of forgiveness, that you can allow yourself to stay there a little longer, to experience the healing of that, to experience the joy of that, and then allow yourself to see that infinite patience may occur to you. That in fact, this is arming you and strengthening you against the division of your mind again, because your mind may otherwise divide quickly from your heart again, and forgetting then and dissociating again into the difficulties, into the confusion, into the constancy of change, into the humdrum and mundane outer reality that seems to be confusing.
The two emotions. You have but two emotions, yet in your private world you react to each of them as though it were the other. For love cannot abide in a world apart, where when it comes it is not recognized. If you see your own hatred as your brother, you are not seeing him. Every one draws nigh unto you what he loves, and recoils from what he feels. And you react with fear to love, and draw away from it. Yet fear attracts you, and believing it is love, you call it to yourself.
Oops, that again. So your experience of time is fundamentally the subjective rate at which your mind seems to change its overall perspectives. Regardless of how your mind seems to change its perspectives of the physical world, the actual mental experience of time, or the experience of time continuity, is a back and forth association of a past and possible futures. It's a place where you can get lost. Without that quality of the experience of time, however, in that way that it goes back and forth between the past and possible futures, then you would only experience the physical changes. This is what I mentioned earlier. I want to reduce the psychological time so that I see only the physical changes. In other words, the physical changes now become neutral in a sense, because in fact they no longer have a psychological edge to them, a psychological drama about them that sucks me in, that pulls me away from my love, that pulls me away from my truth, that pulls me away from kindness and joy. So it's in that context then that we call time, where it's actually a reality of the experience of projecting the continuity of time outside ourselves. So do not seek
Private world
pick up.
filled with figures of fear you have invited into it, and all the love your brother offers you, you do not see. Do not seek visions through your eyes, for you made your way of seeing that you might see in darkness, and in this you are deceived. As you look upon yourself and judge what you do honestly, you may be tempted to wonder how you could be guiltless. Yet consider this: you are not guiltless in time, but in eternity. You have sinned in the past, but there is no past. Always has no direction. Time seems to go in one direction, but when you reach its end, it will roll up like a big long carpet spread along the paths behind you, and will disappear.
So time then becomes, in other words, this idea here is time becomes an illusion to you now. So you see through time. When you do see through time, you begin to experience timelessness. And it's there that you can see through anything else that seems to involve time outside yourself or things outside of yourself. It's there where you begin to experience above the battleground. It's there where you begin to become helpful, in a sense, to see the undoing of the difficulties, both in your time of this present life that you think you have, and also of all time in which, in fact, you no longer have a need for time outside of yourself. The only time then, for the purpose of increasing the reality or strengthening the reality then, is from timelessness. This is the dissolving of the ego, in a sense about timelessness. You learn to actually have a sense about timelessness while you still have a body within time and space. But your body now seems to be directed from this sense of the truth about yourself as that you're not an object outside of yourself. That in fact you see things from above the battleground, and this is impossible to do if in fact you can't rest in infinite patience. So you're learning to rest in infinite patience. Don't be upset with yourself, because learning to rest in infinite patience is foreign to the wrong mind. It's foreign to the mind that experiences the world as if it's outside of itself. When I begin to experience it from infinite patience, it's only within myself that the need is there to see the truth. There's no longer a need to see the truth outside of myself. And so I learn to adapt to the world such that it doesn't cause me to adapt the truth. I adapt to the truth by allowing myself just to remain within it, and to therefore see the reflections of it back to me. Otherwise, I'm looking into a mirror that doesn't reflect anything back to me, because the world outside myself is made from nothing. There's nothing to reflect back to me about the truth. When I want to see the truth, I can't look in the world outside myself to see it there, because all that's going to be reflected back to me is nothing. Therefore, I'm going to see only what in fact I'm projecting. When I stop projecting, then I rest in infinite patience, and then as I look into the world, I see through it, and the mirror then of it reflects back to me my truth, the increasing of joy, the increasing of calm, the increasing of peacefulness, the increasing of miracle-mindedness.
As long as you believe the Son of God is guilty, you will walk along this parapet, believing that it leads to death, and the journey will seem long and cruel and senseless, for so it is. Finding the present. To perceive truly is to be aware of all reality through the awareness of your own. You consider it natural to use your past experience as a reference point from which to judge the present, yet this is unnatural because it is delusional. Time can release as well as imprison, depending on whose interpretations of it you use. Past, present, and future are not continuous unless you force continuity on them. You can perceive them as continuous and make them so for you, but do not be deceived and then believe that this is how it is. For to believe reality is what you would have it be according to your use for it is delusional. You would destroy time's continuity by breaking it into past, present, and future for your own purposes. You would anticipate the future on the basis of your past experience and plan for it accordingly. Yet by doing so, you are aligning past and future and not allowing the miracle, which could intervene between them and free you to be born again.
So we're going to see the illusion of time begin to become unimportant to us outside of ourselves. But we're also going to see a better way to perceive through time what is true or more true, because in remaining within the infinite patience of the infinite use of time, then in fact time is like a portal that opens for us. So we see the unchanging, we see the unchanging reality of what is real, We see it right through what seems to appear in the world because we see what's real first. And then we bring into the world what is true. We bring into the world what is true, not to give it to the world for nothing, but to give it to the world when the world allows itself to see it wants the truth, it wants the reality. So it becomes less codependent, therefore, because we're not trying to change the world outside ourselves. We're simply allowing ourselves to be observing the world for it to cry out for its need from us to see the truth. We become part of Spirit, then part of the Holy Spirit, then extending, then joy, calm, peace, and love from this awareness now of above the battleground, above all thought which diminishes the truth, in only the awareness of the increasing of truth. Remember, God's truth, God's love, God's joy always is increasing. That's why it's eternal. It always is increasing. It never changes from that. The perfect reality is always increasing joy, increasing the truth, increasing love.
The miracle enables you to see your brother without his past, and so perceive him as born again. His errors are all past, and by perceiving him without them, you are releasing him from judgment into timeless awareness. And since his past is yours, you share in this release. Attainment of the real world. You do not really want the world you see, for it has
I did that. Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute. So, mentally, what happens is that this oscillation occurs. We're stuck between the past and the possibilities of the future. So, what has happened, what might happen, what has happened, what might happen. We're stuck in this awareness that seems to alter this way or oscillate this way. It must happen. It has happened. It might happen. This must happen, and so on and so forth. Different ways of saying it, but it's all the same oscillating. It's this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth that actually prolongs time, actually prolongs guilt and willful self-pride, and actually causes time to be separate for there to be objects, for there to be separate things. So it's this use of our mind mentally oscillating between what could happen and what seemed to have happened in such a way as it continues this way. It's a discontinuity of infinite time. It's a finite time. In other words, there are discrete, finite moments of time. Discrete meaning separate from each other. They're not even connected in any way, even related. Each moment of time in the world outside ourselves is not even related to the previous moment. There's no previous moment that causes this moment. There's no cause of actually any moment. It's only the oscillating that occurred in the wrong mind that seems to make the world outside ourselves real, seems to make the use of time to be a thought loop between what seems to have happened and what might seem to happen after it. And therefore, we remember it because of the importance that we give it, which takes us away from the importance of the truth. Infinitely patient, however, we begin to return to the infinity of time, or the infinite use of time, to see the fiction dissolve, and to see instead the truth begin to replace it. If we can remain within infinite patience and the infinite use of time, then we allow ourselves to remain above the battleground, and this is where, in fact, we have now the ability to form holy relationships instead of special relationships. So we'll get into special relationships and the sort of the warning about them, and talk a little bit more about them in the next few chapters. But right now, let's concentrate on the best use of our time, increasing mindfulness such that we can have a waking mindfulness. So we walk around in mindfulness, or the peacefulness of the present moment. So in fact, we don't get lost in this oscillating between what might have happened and what might happen, and what did happen in our mind that seems to make it continuous, as if it's infinite. But there's no infinite time in the time that's finite outside ourselves. The finite times and the finite moments of time are each separated one from another. They're not joined in any way. That's the total illusion. It's a total misuse of our mind, as if we see it, that in fact it can see time and objects separate from each other. It can't really do that. That's an illusion. That's the projection of the guilt and the difficulties of what might be judged, how it might be judged, who might be blamed, why they might be blamed, and so on and so forth. And then the misuse of our will to be pridefully using will, actually against God's will that way. So a wrong sort of pride. The right side of pride would be humble and relaxed and calm and allowing itself to see patience, to be helpful that way.
Attainment of the real world. You do not really want the world you see, for it has disappointed you since time began. Yet the real world has the power to touch you even here, because you love it. No one in this distracted world but has seen some glimpses of the other world about him. Yet while he still lays value on his own, he will deny the vision of the other, maintaining that he loves what he loves not, and following not the road that love points out. You will first dream of peace, and then awaken to it. Everything the ego tells you that you need will hurt you. Only the Holy Spirit knows what you need. Leave then your needs to Him. Miracles are examples of right thinking, aligning your perceptions with truth as God created it.
So that's the idea here of allowing my mind to again be aligned with the heart, my love, as God put it in my heart. So I need also to align my mind, therefore, with the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit is showing me how that God put love into my heart. The Holy Spirit is showing me the escape from perceiving differences, for perceiving there to be a separation between cause and effect. First, I must perceive that there is a separation between cause and effect in my mind, then to wake up to the fact of that's an illusion that makes the finite reality outside myself to seem to be real, and I might return therefore to the infinite mind, which, joining with the Holy Spirit now, is the alignment of the truth about myself or my mind with what God put in my heart, the truth about myself, who really I am. And this is now the glimpse of Spirit and the appearance of the Holy Spirit to become real to me. And then this leads to the holy instant of time, in which I now live in infinite time and infinite patience and infinite ability to be helpful and loving, and to extend that in the world, which is no longer outside myself, is now only inside myself. But I do see myself able to use the physicalness of the world outside myself for the purpose of increasing joy, increasing kindness, and infinitely now peacefully able to see that from the infinite awareness and infinite patience of this reality that's shown to me, which I cannot find on my own. I must join in the way we've talked about, through prayer and meditation and mindfulness, through the awareness of forgiveness, the release from fear and suffering, into the healing of the truth of myself as it begins to become shown to me, as it replaces my need to create myself outside of myself, as I begin to let go of the suffering of what I had done, to see in fact the truth about myself, that I can certainly recognize what is more true and more true and more true, and the increasing of the truth, therefore, to liberate my mind from all the untruth, all the doubt, all the difficulties.
From perception to knowledge, all healing is released from the past. The very real difference between perception and knowledge becomes quite apparent if you consider this. There is nothing partial about knowledge. Every aspect is whole, and therefore no aspect is separate. You are an aspect of knowledge, being of in the mind of God who knows you. Perfect perception then has many elements in common with knowledge, making transfer to it possible. Yet the last step must be taken by God, because the last step in your redemption, which seems to be in the future, was accomplished by God in your creation. The separation has not interrupted it. The creation could not be interrupted. The separation is merely a faulty formulation of reality, with no effect at all.
So, to see the truth about creation, then, is to allow myself to have the awareness of this living above thought. I also refer to it as all reason now supporting that love and above is all that I want to be aware of. I only want to be aware of love and the need for love and the giving of love and the joy of love. And this is where, in fact, I want to live in my mind, so that my mind is only aware of a need for love and the increasing of love, to give the kindness, to give peace, to give joy to all those that seem to be part of my reality, as if they were separate, but now they're no longer needing to be separate, because I see through the illusion to see, in fact, their hearts and what God put in their hearts, which is what they want to see. This is how I become truly helpful.
When you have seen your brothers as yourself, you will be released to knowledge, having learned to free yourself through Him who knows of freedom.
Now, this is where I got to pick up here, because this got skipped. So the cloud of guilt is that in the release from guilt is the ego's whole undoing. Make no one fearful, for his guilt is yours, and by obeying the ego's harsh commandments, you bring its condemnation on yourself, and you will not escape the punishment, therefore, that it offers those who obey it. The ego only offers punishment, and by following the ideas of condemnation, of being unfairly treated, of differences, of disagreements, of any confusion and contradiction. By following this, then, we're following the ego's offer of punishment. So we're actually, in a sense, we're allowing ourselves to be attracted to punishment, in a sense. The ego rewards fidelity to it with pain, suffering, and a loss of faith. It gives us a faith in pain, is what it gives us. This is what it offers to us. The world, then, can give you only what you gave it. So you give to the world this infinite patience. You give to the world your choice to see within yourself peace and kindness and love, to see only infinitely patiently to see that. Then, in fact, you give to the world what it needs. So stop giving to the world punishment. Stop giving to the world disagreements. Stop giving to the world frustration, your frustration with it. Stop giving those things. Be quiet. Retreat into the back of your mind, where you can allow Spirit to look at with you what you were about to do, what you thought was necessary, to see, in fact, it isn't, and allow yourself to see what Spirit sees for you, and therefore you can follow Spirit then through what seems to occur next and next and next, to unify then those moments in the joy of the infinite use of patience, in the infinite use of time, instead of separated moments of time, which are really disconnected and not even related to each other. So it's in finding the meaningfulness then that we let go of what has no meaning, and everything that we think that we know, and everything that we think that we found, that seems to come from the world outside ourselves is the illusion which we're letting go of. We're learning to see past it. All kinds of memories might come up about the past, about what you did or what somebody else did, and so on and so on and so on. All that is this what the ego promises us for following the ego's logic, for following the ego's reasoning, for following doubt, for following confusion, for following disorderly conduct, for following drinking too much, or eating too much, or gambling too much, or having too much crazy, wild ideas. All these things is what the ego promises us. So see no one then as guilty, and you'll begin to affirm the truth of guiltlessness unto yourself and into your mind, and to release yourself from the prideful use of self-will. Do not be afraid then to look within, and the ego tells you all is black with guilt within you, and bids you not look in within it. Instead, it bids you to look upon your brothers and see the guilt in them. So that's what the Course refers to in that method. And the method I like to remind us about is that's the victim and victimization cycle. And that's what ties in with some of the other literature that I do with book studies, because we're looking at the undoing of the victim and the victimization. The perpetrator, the rescuer, and the victim need to be undone. That's the victim triangle, another way to describe it. And most of what I spend my time doing in book studies and my work on Facebook and so on and so forth is helping to undo the victim and victimization cycles, where we meet sort of like a parasite within our mind that seems to gobble up all the truth and turn it into craziness, and turn it into lies, and turn it into experiences of frustration and difficulties and confusion. Now we can continue with the last part. This is the last part. She reads most of it now, about 10 minutes.
Released from guilt. You are accustomed to the notion that the mind can see the source of pain where it is not. The doubtful service of such displacement is to hide the real source of guilt and keep you from your awareness, the full perception that it is insane. Displacement always is maintained by the illusion that the source of guilt from which attention is diverted must be true and must be fearful, or you would not have displaced the guilt onto what you believe to be less fearful. When you maintain that you are guilty, but the source of the guilt lies in the past, you're not looking inward. The past is not in you. Determine then to be not as you were. Use no relationship to hold you to the past, but with each one, each day, be born again. A minute, even less, will be enough to free you from the past and give your mind a peace over to the atonement. When everyone is welcome to you, as you would have yourself be welcome to your Father, then you will see no guilt in you, for you will have accepted the atonement which shone within you all the while you dreamed of guilt, and would not look within to see it.
One way that I practice allowing myself to escape from worries or guilt or my ego is I spend a good bit of time before any serious meditation or whatever. I spend a good bit of time just following my breathing. So I breathe in and I allow myself to look within this way, in that I sort of watch it enter into my body, and then through my body, and then all through the extremities of my body, into my fingertips and into my toes and into the soles of my feet. And if I'm sitting down, then into my bottom and my legs, wherever they touch things, to feel the air as though it's moving through those parts of me. This enlivens me now to see that I can look within, and that I can be uninterrupted by the neediness of looking without of myself. We need to look out without ourselves because we believe that love is out there someplace. We believe that reality is out there someplace. So we're constantly interrupted from the peacefulness of this simple experiment to see that I can watch the breathing within myself to see the enlivenment of my inner body. This helps me to see that I can look within without being disturbed, without being confused, without being disoriented, without dissociating into making myself separate from myself. When I have the experiences in which my body now seems to be vibrating haphazardly, and I seem to be caught up in thoughts about different things or difficulties, then I'm not actually present. Can't be present because that's the past intruding into the present, taking the present and separating it into three parts. The one part being the present, which is so short, so incomplete in a sense that it's almost missed, because it is missed because I'm not actually living in the present. So I need to live in the present and practice living in the present. It definitely takes time to develop a skill for being able to recognize the present. Recognizing the present will be shown to me, though. I needn't try to find it as though I can work hard at it. I can do the integrating part just by making the choice to use my time more wisely, to increase my use of breath and of prayer and of mindful meditation, to see that in fact I can loosen myself from fear a little bit. Therefore, I can recognize forgiveness when it begins to become something that I'm more completely aware of. So that's called the ladder of prayer also, which I do at the end of the chapters. We'll look at the Song of Prayer, which is a pamphlet that comes with A Course in Miracles. Very beautiful awareness of the use of prayer and forgiveness and healing.
Everything the ego perceives is a separate whole, without the relationship that implies being. The ego is thus against communication, except insofar as it is utilized to establish separateness rather than to abolish it. The communication system of the ego is based on its own thought system, as is everything else it dictates. Its communication is controlled by its need to protect itself, and it will disrupt communication when it experiences threat. This disruption is a reaction to a specific person or persons. The specificity
There you go, Aaron.
of the ego's thinking now results in spurious generalizations, which is really not abstract at all. It merely responds in certain specific ways to everything it perceives as related. As long as you believe that guilt is justified in any way, in anyone, whatever he may do, you will not look within, where you would always find atonement. The end of guilt will never come as long as you believe there is a reason for it, for you must learn that guilt is always totally insane and has no reason. The Holy Spirit seeks not to dispel reality. If guilt were real, atonement would not be. The purpose of atonement is to dispel illusions, not to establish them as real and then forget them. The Holy Spirit does not keep illusions in your mind to frighten you and show them to you fearfully to demonstrate what he saved you from. What he has saved you from is gone. Give no reality to guilt. See no reason for it. The Holy Spirit does what God would have him do, and has always done so. He has seen separation, but knows of union. He teaches healing, but he also knows creation. He would have you see and teach as he does, and through him.
So we'll see here in the Peace of Heaven this idea about breathing within to the increasing of the heaven within, to the increasing of the peace within, to increasing of the calm within. So as I begin to do this in breathing, then I'm ready for a guided meditation, or I'm ready for a mindfulness of the increasing of joy. I'm ready for these ideas now, which advance myself into the awareness of healing, the awareness of miracle-mindedness that now replaces my need to think separate thoughts, but only to use miracle-mindedness, which is the continuity of the infinite use of time for the infinite purposes of increasing joy.
The peace of heaven. When we are all united in heaven, you will value nothing what you value here, for nothing that you value here do you value wholly, and so you do not value it at all. You whose mind is darkened by doubt and guilt, remember this. God gave the Holy Spirit to you, and gave him the mission to remove all doubt and every trace of guilt that his dear Son has laid upon himself. It is impossible that this mission fail. Have faith in only this one thing, and it will be sufficient. God wills you to be in heaven, and nothing can keep you from it, or it from you. The communication link that God himself placed within you, joining your mind with his, cannot be broken. You will learn salvation because you will learn how to save. It will not be possible to exempt yourself from what the Holy Spirit wants to teach you. Accepting the atonement teaches you what immortality is, for by accepting your guiltlessness, you learn that the past has never been, and so the future is needless and will not be. We are in heaven now and eternally. However, because of beliefs, everything in a dream of separate bodies seems to be whole. In this dream of separation, the endless battles, the pain, destruction, and death seem to be inevitable. Remember, God gave us the Holy Spirit and the call to truth that reminds us of God's love. The Holy Spirit will undo for you everything you have learned that teaches that what is not true must be reconciled with truth. This is the reconciliation the ego would substitute for your reconciliation to sanity and to peace. The Holy Spirit has a very different kind of reconciliation in his mind for you. Failure is of the ego, not of God. From him you cannot wander, and there is no possibility that the plan the Holy Spirit offers to everyone for the salvation of everyone will not be perfectly accomplished. You will be released, and you will not remember anything you made that was not created for you or by you in return. For how can you remember what was never true, or not remember what has always been? It is this reconciliation with truth, and only truth, in which the peace of heaven lies. Grace is the natural state of every son of God. Recognizing the separation thought system for what it is will be an essential first step as we learn to recognize ego separation for the lies they represent. We will cease to be deceived. Believing we are always one of the ego's many identities, we act as if we are threatened. The attempt to understand totality by breaking it down is clearly the characteristically contradictory approach of the ego to everything. The ego believes that power, understanding, and truth lie in separation, and to establish this belief it must attack. Unaware that the belief cannot be established, and obsessed with the conviction that separation is salvation, the ego attacks everything it perceives by breaking it into small disconnected parts, without meaningful relationships, and therefore without meaning. The ego will always substitute chaos for meaning, for if separation is salvation, harmony is threat.
So we see here the purpose of the ego really is for the awareness that there's no place to go, there's nothing to see, there's nothing here really for us to find meaningful outside ourselves. So living in a body is not possible for us to thrive. It's only possible for us to suffer believing that we live in bodies. Nothing about the physical world will actually be saved. It's only the eternal mind, which has been seemingly separated from our reality, which we're looking at. We're looking at it in such a way as that we become part of the thought loop of it, to see itself as though it is outside of itself, and to argue with itself, to see in fact that it seems to be lost. The way to escape is given to us. We needn't try to figure it out, to analyze it, to evaluate it. We simply need to do the steps that's necessary to see the truth. The steps in the 12-step program or the steps in the atonement process, exactly the same thing, really. So long as we know, in fact, that it's taking us to the ability to make decisions with the God of our understanding. So, in fact, it seems to be able that we can increase our conscious contact with that God, and therefore to be able to extend His joy, peacefulness, and kindness in giving to others what we have found.
The way to escape from the system is not by trying to change it. We have to escape by ceasing to believe in the validity of separating consciousness. To do this, we need help from the Holy Spirit, the right-minded that has never forgotten the reality of love. The escape from guilt occurs as we awaken to inner peace. We must learn to value peaceful innocence. The Holy Spirit will always show us innocence. Spirit reacts in the same way to everything it knows is true, and does not respond at all to anything else, nor does it make any attempt to establish what is true. We will begin to see guilt is not real with the Holy Spirit's help. And my favorite part, living in the solution. Our part, develop honesty to discuss insecurity for the purpose of healing, not blaming. Be done with the hiding the low-down feelings associated with guilt. And keep always in mind, miracles are expressions of love. But they may not always have observable effects. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and we'll see you again soon.
So there's a couple of additional things at the end here. A couple of the lessons, 169 especially, I give you two different versions of this with commentary. And then a real amazing piece of work here. This is not from A Course in Miracles. In and out of time and the mechanics of the momentary changes, conscious mechanics and the reality of illusions, conscious mechanics and the physical time experience, conscious mechanics and the mental time experiences. Two different ways of seeing time here, and two different ways of seeing the reality of consciousness here. So that this whole blend here really gives us a unique vision of what time and space, how it connects consciousness to our mind to make ourselves seem separate from ourselves. So this is pretty interesting stuff. It's not from A Course in Miracles. It's from someone else. I was waiting for him to go a little further with this, but he didn't seem to ever get there. But these are quite amazing, though. So, I mean, he's done a life's work here in these 4 videos, if you want to watch them. Pretty interesting stuff. Something very fascinating to me, which I'm certainly saying it in such a way as I'm enthusiastic about it. But not everybody really likes that stuff, so don't feel embarrassed if, in fact, you don't seem to find it of great interest to you. It's no big deal. But I think it's interesting if you happen to find this sort of thing interesting about how time works, about how consciousness works, and about how you can connect the dots now to see what the Course is teaching you is actually also opening our awareness to what science really is for, which is to falsify what isn't true and to find more what is true instead. Turn off the video.